In the next series of lectures, we're going to take a look at the way that the users interact with our application and how they flow through our application. One good idea is to develop a storyboard. I have an example here I did for a class on Fluid UI, which is quite nice. Fluidui.com lets you do some storyboarding here. And what I have is, one second, I have the live plant places application, and I have done a few screen mock-ups here and a little bit of storyboarding. I'll be more than happy to cover storyboarding in depth in a future lecture. But what you'll see is that we start with a screen which has a menu on it, which is this screen right here. And then it shows how we can progress through the app. We can go to advanced search, get a list of plants, see plant details. Or we can go to GPS a plant. From there we can go to advanced search, get a list of plants, select one, and that's the plant we're GPSing. Or we can go to search by color, or I think we covered just about all the paths here, but you'll see that this advanced search screen comes up many times through the application. One nice thing here about Fluid UI is that if you hit this play button, it will actually allow you to go through kind of a mock-up of your app. So I can say GPS a plant, comes to my search screen. This is a mocked up search screen. I can say select a plant, okay, and we see the advanced search screen, and probably going to be a little bit off. Yeah, right down there at the bottom I can hit search. It will show the search results. I can click on a plant and it will bring a little mock-up of what the plant detail screen will look like. So as I mentioned, if there's interest, I can cover storyboarding in a different lecture. I actually already have a recorded lecture on YouTube that covers storyboarding. I will link that into this week's material if that's of interest to you. So in any case, to cover how we actually do these flows, we need to know several things. And these are the things we're going to cover in the next 5 or so lectures that we're going to have. What are these things? Number one, we need to know how to make a new activity, and we need to know how to associate a layout with that activity. Number two, we need to know how to get from one activity to another by using intents. That's how we traverse from one activity to another. There are two kinds of intents, implicit intents and explicit intents. Okay, so we'll need to look at both of those. We also are going to need to look at how we get data from one activity returned to a different activity. So what we're looking at here, I just want to give a walkthrough of some of the things we're going to look at. This is the live plant places application naturally on an emulator. Notice something. If I choose advanced plant search, what's going to happen is it's going to take me to the advanced search screen. Now again, because this is an emulator, it's a bit slower than we would see on an actual device. As a matter of fact, I'm running on a computer with limited memory. Okay, if I type in redbud and then I click search, okay, we'll go ahead and choose Eastern Redbud. Notice it auto-completes. Now we know that's something that is something we definitely want to consider when we're writing an app. Things like autocomplete, because we want to definitely minimize keystrokes. And why do we want to minimize keystrokes? We want to minimize keystrokes to simplify the application. So I type in Eastern Redbud and then I hit search, and this is coming from the advanced search screen. From here it's going to show me a list of plants that match that. And when I get that list, and there's only one because I typed in a very specific name, when I get that list I can click and it's going to take me to what's called a web view, which will show me details of this plant. And basically at this point I have reached the end of the navigation. From here what I'd want to do is I'd want to hit the back button to get back into the application. Okay, pause the video for a second there because sometimes it takes a moment to come up in the emulator. So what we've done here is we've watched the app jump from screen to screen to screen, and the preceding screen has always provided information to the following screen. We need to consider two other points though. What about a case where, number one, we can open up a screen and that screen will provide information to the preceding screen. In other words, I'm on an activity, I open another activity. That other activity, the user will do some action, and then we'll respond to the initial activity with the results of that action. That's one thing we want to consider. The other thing we want to consider, now I'm going to go back here, is we want to put together an app very quickly. So we need to think about when we can reuse components. So we saw the detail screen, we saw the result screen, now we're looking at the search screen. Let's go back and let's check, let's do click on GPS a plant. What we're going to see here is this is the GPS a plant screen, and we have a place for latitude and longitude. While in debug mode, we can actually emulate a latitude and longitude. Also, when this app is running live, those latitude and longitude values will update every 60 seconds. Now, we want to get a latitude and longitude, but we also want to associate that latitude and longitude with a specific plant. So notice there's a select a plant button here. I can click on this and watch what's going to happen. You might see something somewhat familiar. Now take a look. It's the very same search screen that we saw before. Now let's see what happens when I type in redbud again. Remember, what our goal here is to associate a GPS location with a redbud. So in other words, I'm out in the field. I see a redbud tree. I want to add a GPS point to it. So I'm going to go to the search screen. I'm going to choose redbud just like we did before, but we're going to see one slight difference. Now, first of all, notice that we are reusing the exact same screen. And think about this. The smaller the footprint of your app, the easier it is to distribute, and more importantly, the easier it is to maintain. So we want to reuse screens wherever we can. I'm going to go ahead and hit search. We want to think very significantly about designing for reuse. This becomes easier when we get to Android 3 or and greater, with the introduction of fragments, where we can actually make little reusable nuggets of our screen. This app is a few years old and was designed for Android 2.2 before we had fragments. So it doesn't have that same amount of reusability, but that's the eventual goal. Okay, now we've come to the results screen. This looks a lot like the screen we saw earlier, but watch the different action that happens when I click Eastern Redbud. It's not going to go to the web view with the details of the Eastern Redbud. Instead, what it's going to do is it's going to return back to the GPS a plant screen, and it's going to populate the plant with Eastern Redbud, which means I'm GPSing this plant called Eastern Redbud. So and here we go. It's a little bit hard to see here, but you see this used to be red text and now it's green text saying new specimen Eastern Redbud. So notice there was a bit of reusability there. Notice there was a reuse of some screen, but also repurposing the screen for a different result. In other words, when the user picks a result, I want to return back to the first screen. Okay, that's what we call startActivityForReasult, and that's one of the things that we are going to talk about in this next series of lectures. Now, so far we've been dealing with explicit intents, which is where we are using activities that are entirely within our application. Explicit intent means when I click this button, I explicitly want to go to this other activity. Many times we want to do that. But think very seriously when I said about reuse, when I talked about reuse. Think very seriously about external things that you can reuse as well. We do that through implicit intents. So I'm going to click on Search by Color. And what's going to happen here is it's going to give me a couple of options. One is I can take a new photo. The other is I can open an existing image. When I first wrote this application, on the Take New Photo, I had it actually go out and physically turn on the camera, physically acquire an image from the camera, and return that. Took a lot of work. Then I found out there was a much easier way to do that. So if I choose Take a New Photo, and I'll warn you, the photo emulator, the camera emulator in Android devices on the emulator is notoriously painful. This is bringing up an emulator of the camera. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this button here to take a photo, and with any luck it will actually take. So this is where the emulator is just a little bit goofy sometimes. Okay, take the photo, and then I'm going to click, it's just off screen here, but I'm going to click a little checkbox to say that photo is acceptable. And it's going to, with any luck, it's going to return this photo back to our, there we go, back to our search screen. Okay, it's going to return back to our search screen. Now, the software has been written to toggle the camera. That's nothing new. Software has been written to toggle the camera. And we want to reuse that software. Okay, so we reuse that with something called an implicit intent. And that's a feature we're going to talk about. So if we want to call software that already exists, it's called an implicit intent. You want to think a lot about that for your own project. You want to consider where you can reuse other software that's already been written. Okay. I can also choose Open Existing Image. Now again, in the first version of Plant Places Mobile, Open Existing Image, and unfortunately I don't have any images on this emulator here. But in the first version of Plant Places Mobile, I wrote a little file picker myself. Then I thought, why am I doing that? Because there's already gallery views that exist, so why bother with writing my own image picker when I can just reuse something that already exists? When I reuse something, it takes only about 4 lines of code, much less than many dozens or hundreds of lines I'd have to write to do it myself. That means less stuff I need to test, which means if we think back to the triangle, the paradigm I talked about earlier in features, time, and quality, we can get more features in less time because we have to spend less time testing. So we want to think of apps that we can reuse or components that we can reuse. That'll be a big theme. Now, I don't think I have any colors indexed for plants with these colors, but let me go ahead and choose the green. I might be wrong. I don't think I have any colors associated, any plants associated with that green. But what that would normally do then is that would take us to a list of plants that have matching colors. So probably nothing will come up here. And then from there we can go into a detail view. So these are the big concepts we're going to talk about in the next few videos. Number one, writing a new screen and associating, by screen I mean an activity and a layout, associating those two together. So associating a layout and an activity together, that's number one. Number two, we're going to look at explicit intents, where we call one screen to another within our application. Number three, we're going to look at implicit intents, which is where we call an activity or a screen that's provided to us from another application. Number four, we're going to look at startActivityForReasult rather, which allows us to call an activity, call an intent, have that activity do something, and then return a result to us. And number five, we're going to look at the Android activity lifecycle. We want to look at that after we've explored intents a little bit so we can watch what happens when we move from one intent to another. In other words, you notice I was on the GPS of plant screen. That takes a pretty good amount of energy from the phone to listen for GPS. So as soon as I leave that screen, we want to turn that feature off. As soon as I return that screen to that screen, we want to turn that feature back on. And that's part of the Android activity lifecycle. So those are the things that we're going to look at in the next few videos. I look forward to presenting them to you. Thank you.